Why did an entire military base fall silent when a silver-haired woman exposed the tattoo on her back? And what top-secret mission was once deemed so lethal that no one was expected to survive it? They told her to shed that worn-out uniform if she was no longer on active duty. But the moment she turned away, the whole room froze. Not from defiance, not from argument, but from the sight of the faded ink on her spine. A mark none here fully understood, yet all felt deep in their bones. She said nothing. She simply stood there, motionless, as she once did before guns and suspicion decades ago. All right, my dear audience, prepare yourselves for a tale that will leave you speechless. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly connect with what I'm unveiling here. And drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from every corner of the globe. Margaret stood motionless at the records desk, her feet planted parallel as if still in formation for an early morning roll call. Her back rigid, shoulders unbowed, and the papers in her hand unshaking, though the silence around her thickened like years of undisturbed dust. Before her, a young soldier in a crisp new uniform, his collar still stiff with creases, kept his gaze glued to his phone, his thumb scrolling through messages in a private chat. When he finally looked up, reluctance flashed in his eyes, as though speaking to a middle-aged woman were an unbearable chore. He glanced at her ID card, then at the faded PT shirt she wore, his eyes narrowing, lips rehearsing a line from the handbook. Margaret knew the script before he spoke. It wasn't the first time. "It's not on the roster, so you can't wear that," he said, voice not harsh but hollow, the tone of someone who's never understood the weight of a uniform or the symbols etched into a person. She nodded slightly, then extended the letter folded in half, its paper worn, edges frayed, yet the ink still clear. A confirmation from Captain Green, the only person on base who remembered her name without checking the files. The young soldier studied the letter as if confronting an unscripted test, his eyes drifting over each line, brief, indifferent, then pausing at the signature. His hand recoiled, then set the letter down. "I'm sorry. You still need to change your shirt. Otherwise, you'll have to leave the base." His words landed like an order ricocheting. No options, no room for dignity, no moment for choice. Margaret did not respond. She did not question. She had heard lines like that too many times to be surprised. Yet somewhere inside, something chilled. Not from their words, but from the familiar attitude. They saw nothing but worn fabric, nothing beneath it. Eyes turned toward her, not from curiosity, but from the reflex of a closed environment, where any difference is treated like a threat. Two admin clerks whispered behind their desk, their voices low but loud enough to pierce the thin air. Someone pulled out a phone, lifted it casually. A near-silent click echoed. Margaret knew the precise moment the photo was taken. Seconds later, screens around the lobby flickered to life. First came the soft buzz of incoming messages, then suppressed laughter, a smirk from the duty soldier. She didn't need to look to know what was happening. Their whispers, their shares, their mockery. She'd seen it at other bases where memories felt more like burdens than assets. The first caption was probably benign, veterans still trying to squeeze into formation. Then followed the cheap jokes, the tasteless memes, fleeting as dust, yet always leaving a thick layer in the eyes of those watching. She remained still. No one saw her fingers clutch the canvas bag's edge. No one noticed her pulse quicken at her wrist, or her shoulders tensing as though holding something in. But if someone looked closely, they might see her eyes unblinking. a sign of discipline so ingrained it blurred the line between reflex and identity. She spoke not a word, asked no why, offered no explanation, made no defense. To them, her silence was submission. To her, it was the last intact bastion of strength, untouchable by jokes, images, or cheap words. There stood a single woman in a worn PT shirt, gazing unwaveringly at the military base she once believed she belonged to. No one in the crowd grasped that sometimes the worst humiliation isn't public mockery. It's being rendered invisible, and they chose the easiest way to deny her past, turning her into a joke rather than facing what they dared not see. Margaret did not turn away. She shifted forward a fraction, stepping into something deeper than misunderstanding, a battle without guns or smoke, fought with stares and endurance, a battle she had never lost. They didn't expel her from the base, but neither did they let her stand amid the crowd as one of them. Margaret was gently nudged aside into an empty corner by the registration area, a spot where no one stood, no one looked, and no one thought anyone would sit. It was the kind of space people unconsciously carve out for that which displeases them. There, she was neither support staff, nor advisor, nor veteran, just a weary silhouette in a faded PT shirt, so old the logo was unrecognizable. The canvas bag strap slipping down her shoulder, heavy with papers no one wanted to inspect. She set the bag beside her as gently as if it held memories rather than documents. The fresh recruits carried on as if she didn't exist. They laughed, stretched, patted each other's backs, adjusted their caps and running shoes. A few glanced at Margaret, but none held their gaze, none curious enough to approach, nor respectful enough to pause. A young soldier let out a mocking chuckle, turned to his friends, and half-joked loud enough for her to hear, "Guess she's here to count her last steps of old age." No one reacted. No one stopped him. His words fell into the air like a pebble into still water. No splash, only a quiet ripple. Margaret heard every syllable, yet she did not turn, did not look at anyone, did not respond. Even her breathing betrayed no change. She was accustomed to it, accustomed to disdain wrapped in soft laughter, accustomed to worth measured by the crispness of one's uniform or the straightness of one's back, accustomed to being sidelined by those who had never crossed the borders of their own hearts, never lay awake to the sound of gunfire, never chosen between silence and survival. Margaret sat on the rough concrete edge, her knees bent just enough to avoid hunching her back. She always kept her spine straight, as a reminder that one's backbone is not merely biology, but ethics. Beside her, the canvas bag's flap fell open, revealing a corner of a folded map, its hand-drawn lines still faintly visible. Beneath the yellowed paper lay a notebook, its blue-inked entries varying in thickness as they traced mountain ranges and mission details. Lines no one would read, but once saved lives. No one asked where she came from. No one cared to learn the name of her last campaign. To them, she was a fading symbol, not bright enough to inspire, nor old enough to be legend, just inconvenient. And in that very center of inconvenient, she sat, still as a forgotten stone statue, asking nothing, resisting nothing, offering no justification. Yet her silent presence sent a subtle quake through the space, like a grain of sand in a brand new shoe, not painful, but impossible to ignore. A young soldier passed by. He slowed when he caught her gaze. Not anger, not sorrow, only depth and quiet. He hurried on, but Margaret could still hear his hesitant footfalls. Hesitation not born of fear, but of uncertainty, not knowing what to see, not sure she was someone he wanted to know. And that was what made her feel coldest. Not the mockery, not the averted eyes,
but the truth that these young people had never been taught to recognize another form of strength, one that needs no shouting, no flags, a strength that endures when abandoned, that is silent when alone, that holds itself unbroken even when faith has worn thin as the fabric on one's shoulders. No wind stirred, no one approached, and no one realized that just a few feet away, memories sat too, silent but unyielding. In Margaret's mind, her comrades' faces appeared one by one. Some were still alive, others never grew old. None of them ever asked if they would be honored. They only asked if they could endure until dawn. And now, sitting here amid the next generation's base, they were the reason she did not leave, not bow her head, nor let their cheap jokes drag down the honor engraved by sweat, blood, and truth. No words need be spoken, because some things, if spoken, would only prove one listener understood none of it.
Her silhouette remained pinned to the fringe of the yard, while every other gaze was drawn elsewhere, to where there was sound, laughter, and youth. Margaret sat perfectly still, yet in her stillness, something made the space feel unpredictable. Her back stayed straight, the faded PT shirt rising and falling gently with each steady breath, as if nothing had changed. Yet it was precisely that immobility that captured an unexpected glance. First Lieutenant Cody Lawson was hurrying across the yard, a file in one hand and distraction etched across his brow. He intended to skim past the woman seated in the corner as though she were mere scenery unworthy of notice. But then he froze. A small motion, her hand sweeping her hair up, lifted the fabric just enough to reveal a tiny patch on her back. It wasn't a trendy tattoo, not the intricate designs common among modern young soldiers. That ink was simple, sharply defined, as if each stroke had been etched into her skin with purpose, not pleasure. A series of numbers, 305, encircled by outstretched eagle wings, not an official emblem, but to Lawson, once a fresh trainee in covert operations, it was unmistakable. He felt his breath catch for a second. His mind, instead of processing the documents in his hand, instantly rifled through briefings and the faint chalk notes on classroom boards. Eagle Strike 305, the name whispered through classified channels. A mission never publicized, preserved only in restricted reports and the hushed accounts of those who survived and returned. No one truly knew what had happened there. Only the numbers, the losses, and the silent disappearance of an entire unit. If she had been part of it. If that tattoo told the truth. Lawson did not hesitate. He pulled out his phone, his finger trembling as he dialed the personnel chief. He didn't follow standard procedure. This was a feeling beyond explanation, when instinct and years of training to ignore questions collided with reality. He spoke tersely, his whisper barely breaching the invisible wave of confusion. No immediate confirmation came. The line on the other end held a silence so long it could only exist while the listener sorted which information to retain and which to dismiss. Lawson needed no reply. The expression on the chief's face told him everything. Within 10 minutes, the name Margaret Hayes was no longer a footnote under support volunteers. It had been escalated into the deepest data tiers, each action requiring dual authentication. The message flew out swiftly, but no one responded directly. They didn't want panic. They didn't want mistakes. Yet that very silence was the clearest signal. Lawson told no one else. He never turned to glance at her again. But his steps afterwards slowed. The file in his hand, once light, now weighed heavily with something unnamed. Awareness. Perhaps regret. Maybe the fear that this morning's joke was no longer so simple. And then, as if by an uncontrolled ripple, something began to spread. No one declared anything, no alarm sounded, but eyes shifted. The administrative staff who had first mocked her now stole glances toward Margaret, not with superiority, but with cautious curiosity, as though afraid to uncover something beyond their strength. A young soldier, about to raise his phone again, lowered his hand when he caught Lawson's changed gaze. No one explained, but that look was all the warning he needed. This was no longer just another dull morning. Margaret remained seated, unaware that she had unsettled the entire base, unaware that the tiny tattoo on her back had brushed against a buried layer of memory. She did not move, did not look around. She did not need to. For she knew that in places like this, truth never arrives with sirens. It comes in diverted glances, in sudden silences where there was noise, in the way people inexplicably stop laughing. And she waited, not to prove anything, but because she was far too accustomed to letting truth reveal itself, without her having to speak a single word. Dear audience, take a moment to relax, or sip some water, and then continue listening for the twists still to come. And don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from all corners of the globe. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story so we can bring you many more. The gray SUV rolled to a stop without a loud engine note. Yet its arrival shifted a few pairs of eyes across the yard. No one spoke. No one pointed. But there was a brief hush, a held breath, as if everything knew to pause and see what would unfold next. The door opened, and Captain Samuel Green stepped out. His uniform bore no wrinkle. His polished boots caught the light. His stance was unwavering. Age had not dulled the sharpness honed on countless battle lines. He neither strode nor dawdled. Each footfall carried intent. His gaze swept the yard as though measuring something unseen. Then it halted, where Margaret Hayes stood. No welcoming smile, no surprise, only a steady, silent look, laden with memories of mornings without greeting. He approached without idle chatter, no need for names, no document checks. His eyes fixed on the small tattoo on her back, the faded PT shirt parted just enough to reveal the old ink, the numbers 305 nestled within the outstretched wings of an eagle. His lips pressed together for a moment, then parted, his voice calm, unwavering, the question clear. Where did you earn that? Margaret did not turn immediately. Her first reflex was to steady herself, as if those digits suddenly carried weight, tugging fragments of memory from her chest. When she did face him, her eyes did not flinch, only deepened. Operation Eagle Strike, she replied softly. Kandahar, 2005. No words wasted, no emphasis needed, no further explanation required. Those who understood would understand. Green did not nod. He did not sigh. He took a half step back and raised his right hand, high, decisive, reverent, his arm straight, palm touching his brow, a ritual familiar yet extraordinary in this moment. The silence that followed was no longer indifference. It became attention. No one had ever seen Captain Green salute anyone in that training yard, but today he saluted a gray-haired woman in worn shorts, bare-armed, bearing a back tattoo once dismissed as obsolete. His hand dropped in perfect cadence. He turned to those around him, his voice loud enough without a microphone. Margaret Hayes is hereby cleared to present herself and stand here with honor. Anyone with objections can take them up with me. No threat in his tone, yet no room for dissent. This was not an order, but a declaration. Authority based not on rank alone, but on history and respect. In that instant, the base's axis shifted. Eyes, once clouded with doubt, now scrambled. Some looked away from her gaze. Some tried to recall what they had laughed at. Others simply stood still, unsure how to feel. Margaret did not smile. No further action required. Her honor had been restored, not by the crowd, but by the one who knew her burden. She spoke no word to reclaim it, yet it was returned through the simplest rite, a gesture none dared to mimic. The atmosphere no longer felt like a training ground. It carried something nameless, perhaps shame, perhaps awareness, or both. The mockers bowed their heads. The indifferent began to wonder what they had overlooked. No lectures were needed, no retelling of every detail, just the timely presence of one who knew and one who remembered. Margaret stood unmoving, neither chin lifted nor eyes lowered. She held her posture as if all that had occurred were self-evident. Within her, there was no triumph, only a thin veil of relief, not for being defended, but for the truth finally breaching the walls of protocol and prejudice. She did not require everyone to know the campaign's specifics. She did not ask them to revisit old records. She needed only one who had been there to stand and remember. And that person had just saluted her before them all. Private Harper Reed, a fresh recruit straight out of basic training, had spent the entire morning watching from a safe distance. What she'd heard earlier about Margaret Hayes didn't match any soldier she'd ever known. They'd labeled her that senile vet, someone who assumed special treatment simply for having served. Those words slipped out with disdain, accompanied by muffled laughter. Harper didn't know what to believe until she saw today's events unfold in the training yard. She saw how Margaret didn't push back when she was escorted out of the main area. She saw her sit alone without stepping back, without bowing her head. She saw the shift in atmosphere, from mocking glances to cautious steals of curiosity. And when Captain Green raised his hand in salute, solemn, reverent, Harper felt something inside her stir, as if her intuition had just woken from a long sleep. During the lunch break, in a moment both hesitant and compelling, Harper approached Margaret. No one walked with her. No one noticed. Perhaps they were still wrapped up in drills, or perhaps they simply chose to look away. But Harper could no longer ignore it. She stopped before Margaret, gripping her water bottle so tightly her knuckles whitened, her eyes searching for words that didn't matter anymore. The silence between them stretched just long enough to become honest. Then, in a low but steady voice, not that of a soldier reporting, but that of a young woman seeking something to believe in, she spoke. "How did you manage to stay standing there?" Harper asked, "when everyone just wanted you to step aside?" Margaret lifted her head. Her gaze held no surprise. It was as if she'd been waiting for that question all along, as if it were the only thing that mattered after all the whispers, all the averted looks, and all the half-smiles. She didn't answer at once. She regarded Harper for a moment, slowly, as though weighing what moved within the young woman. Then, in a voice that needed no raising, she began. No lecture, no sermon, just a sharing. "It wasn't easy," she said. Those 3 words, brief yet laden with the weight of decades unseen. No one demanded details, yet they hovered there. The returns with expired ID cards, the job interviews rejected for age alone, the veterans' meetings where people avoided her eyes because they didn't know what to say to someone who'd witnessed what they couldn't imagine. "I was attacked by feelings when I came home," she went on. "The sense that I was no longer needed, that I had no place. But I learned something, and I held on to it." Harper listened in silence. Her eyes, once doubtful, now widened, not in surprise, but in the budding understanding of something she'd never named, but always felt. There was something in Margaret's voice that made her stop caring about the world around them. Each word struck a chord deep inside her. "That," Margaret said slowly, "is a choice you make every day." The words weren't complex, yet they rang like a marker in the storm, a fixed point in a world constantly swept away. "Age doesn't end everything," she continued. "Responsibility doesn't vanish just because someone else is younger. It's still there. And if you acknowledge it, if you truly understand it, you won't break." Harper didn't reply right away. She merely stood there, water bottle in hand. But something in her gaze grew clearer, deeper, a slice of doubt gone, replaced by a respect she didn't have to force. It came naturally. Between Margaret's unassuming calm and the words she'd spoken, Harper saw what she'd been missing: unspoken courage. The way this woman carried her silence without being crushed by it, the way she refused to step back when no one asked her to stand firm. That was a new kind of strength, not the kind shouted in training drills, but the kind that swells quietly through lived experience. Harper nodded gently, as if sealing an unspoken pact with herself. She didn't know how much she'd remember of what she'd heard, but she knew one thing for certain. She could never view Margaret the same way again, and in her eyes, for the first time, there was no bitterness, only the light of someone who'd just found a guiding beacon. The next morning, the duty roster was pinned to the training bulletin board. Amid a sea of young names, Margaret Hayes appeared under PT instructor. No one spoke it aloud, but her presence gave that line of text a different weight. She arrived precisely on time, not early, not late. No one waited. She made no announcements, issued no commands, offered no introduction. No whistle blew. She simply began to move, her first step into the run, as if nothing else in that moment could be more right. Not hurried, not slow. Her pace was oddly steady, as though she ran not to chase a record, but to keep a promise to herself. Her footsteps made no thunderous sound, yet somehow everyone heard them. At first, the young soldiers kept their distance, uncertain whether to fall in behind or wait for someone else to lead. Then, as if by some curious reflex, one by one, they fell into line behind her. No one spoke. No one signaled. They simply did not want to be left behind. Not out of pride, but from the sense that if they lagged, they'd miss something far greater than a physical workout. Harper ran at the back of the pack. Her chest heaved, each breath sharper than usual, but her legs remained unrelenting. She did not glance sideways. She cared not who ran nearby. She focused solely on the gap between her and the silhouette ahead. Margaret did not look back, did not count bodies, did not care who fell behind. Yet, strangely, no one wanted her to run alone. The route stretched on. Sweat began to fall. Breaths quickened. Still, no one gave up, not because they were forced, but because they had seen something yesterday. Something that transformed that woman's presence from nuisance into reminder. That some things outlast youth. That true strength is born not of shouts, but of silent perseverance through time. A whistle sounded, signaling the end of the exercise. Not wildly loud, but enough for everyone to halt. They panted, bent over, hands on knees. Yet all eyes remained on Margaret, who never broke her stride, only eased into a slow stop. She turned her head. Her gaze swept each face, not judging, not searching, simply as if gauging the wind's force after a storm. She did not smile. She did not speak, but when she offered a slight nod, no one felt tested. They felt witnessed. A voice rang out, not loud nor clearly from any one person, but heard by all. That was Eagle Strike 305, wasn't it? Margaret did not answer. She merely lifted her chin. Her eyes met the darkening horizon. A subtle tilt of her neck. A nod neither confirming nor denying, yet heavy enough to still the training yard. No one needed further explanation. The story had already been told, not in words, but in every running stride, in every refusal to quit, in every uninterrupted breath. Silently, they returned to formation. No jostling, no laughter. The atmosphere that once clamored now felt compressed, as if each soldier carried an unspoken thought they had not yet named. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Lawson stood beside Captain Green and the personnel officers. In their hands, they held a copy of Margaret's Eagle Strike photograph, faded, yellowed at the edges, printed from an aging archive. Yet their eyes, shifting from the photo to the woman who had led the run, were filled with understanding, not because they had read her file, but because they had just witnessed. For the first time, they truly understood that some things lie beyond regulation. That legacy need not be printed in training manuals or performance charts. It reveals itself in the moment one refuses to stop, in the choice to keep living when the world around has chosen to forget. And Margaret, she did not need to leave any message. She was the message. When Margaret Hayes left Fort Apache at day's end, her shadow stretched long across the red earth. It imprinted itself on the memories of everyone who'd witnessed that morning. She offered no sermon, she demanded no respect, but through her calm endurance, she taught an entire generation that some honors need no medals. Some victories require no record, only the courage to live by one's convictions. The truth is, sometimes the most frightening prospect for young people isn't war. It's the day they, too, will be forgotten, just as they once tried to forget her. Yet living symbols like Margaret remind us that legacy isn't for boasting, it's for safeguarding. The question isn't, what did she do, but, do we dare to live as she did? And perhaps this isn't the final chapter. Perhaps there's more to come. A memory still unfolding, another return, where untold secrets will emerge. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or simply let you see yourself in someone else's shadow, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments below, and pass this video on to friends and family in the United States. We'd love to know where you're watching from, what time it is for you, and what part of this tale made you stop and listen. Thank you for joining us. There are many stories yet untold, and we look forward to sharing them with you.